You ever walk into a room and feel like you don't exist until someone needs a favor? That was my life. Every single room, every single time. Like I was air until they needed towels folded or dishes washed, or someone to be blamed for the missing charger no one cared about until it was gone. I'm Ember Callahan, and I didn't grow up poor. I just grew up treated like I was, like a housekeeper they didn't have to pay because we happened to share a last name. My mom, real and warm and soft in all the ways that mattered, died when I was just 8, and I remember the way her perfume smelled like honey and lavender, how she whispered goodnight into my hair even when she was sick, and how her absence didn't just leave a hole in my heart, but a vacancy in the family structure that someone else, someone colder, someone manicured and calculating, was all too eager to fill. Janet came with her perfect makeup and her flawless smile, and 3 kids whose shoes probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. And my dad married her like my mom had never existed, like love could be replaced if the new model sparkled hard enough. I watched him change for her. His laugh got quieter, his spine a little softer, and when she looked down on me like I was an eyesore in her suburban palace, he didn't stop her. Janet brought structure, but only the kind that folded me into the corners, made me a shadow of myself. Lexi, Cam, and Weston were the kind of kids who were born knowing their place at the table was permanent, the kind who never questioned if they were loved because they were always being celebrated. Participation trophies turned into actual praise. Mediocrity morphed into golden child glory, and they never had to work to be seen. Meanwhile, I'd memorize every equation, every spelling word, every musical note just to hand my dad an A-plus report card he barely looked at before saying, "Good job, kid." Like I was the paper, not the person who earned it. I was the one who cleaned up after their parties, who ironed Lexi's blouse when she was late to brunch, who knew which wine Janet liked chilled and which candles made her migraines worse. They called me responsible, like it was a consolation prize, like they knew I wasn't pretty enough or charming enough to be adored, so they labeled me useful and thought I should be grateful for it. I remember one brutal summer when the air conditioner broke, and I asked if I could join them at the lake cabin for just a weekend, just 2 nights of sleeping somewhere that didn't smell like mildew and detergent. And Lexi didn't miss a beat. She tilted her head, gave me that fake sweet voice, and said, "Oh, Ember, someone needs to stay and make sure the place doesn't burn down. Besides, Mom said no one else cleans the counters right." And my dad, my flesh and blood, who once rocked me to sleep and told me I was his whole world, just sipped his coffee and nodded like that was justice. So I stayed in the basement on the lumpy mattress that sagged in the middle like it was morning too, while they posted beach selfies and drank cocktails garnished with mint leaves and said things like, "Grateful for family time," without the slightest awareness that I wasn't there. I cried quietly that night, not because I was weak, but because it hurt to be so obviously unwanted, to see my name missing from the group chat, from the reservations, from the framed pictures on the living room wall. My birthdays came and went, like silent calendar blinks. No cards, no cakes, no celebrations, just me and a slice of grocery store pie I bought myself. But when Weston scraped together a C+ in economics, there was a steak dinner with balloons and a toast to overcoming obstacles. I wanted to scream, but instead I studied. I got up early. I read books on leadership and resilience in business because I knew I wouldn't be handed anything. I watched silently while they opened gifts on Christmas morning and handed me lint-rolled scarves they found last minute. I kept every rejection, every cold glance, every backhanded compliment stored in a mental vault. I promised I'd one day turn into a weapon. They posted pictures every year from Cedar Blue Resort, this hyper-exclusive private island off the coast of Florida, with white sand beaches and bungalows that cost more per night than my rent. They called it our second home, even though I'd never been within 10 miles of it. Even though, when I once asked what it was like, Janet said, "You wouldn't understand, sweetie. It's for people who've traveled." My own father, who used to hold my hand when I crossed the street, didn't even question my absence year after year. That resort was their prize, their kingdom, their sanctuary, and I was never considered worthy of it. But deep down, under the ache, under the tears I hid in my pillowcase, under the resentment I swallowed like bitter medicine, something else was forming. A fire, a promise. If they couldn't see me, make myself impossible to ignore, I wouldn't raise my voice. I wouldn't fight for scraps of affection. I'd build something so big, so undeniable, so outrageously successful that they'd be forced to look, not because I begged, but because I became what they feared, powerful without their permission. I didn't want revenge that burned. I wanted revenge that redefined me. I wanted to rise from the basement of that house and own something no one could take from me. I didn't know how yet, but I knew where it would start, with the place they loved most, the one I was never invited to, the one they treated like heaven while I sat in hell. If they thought I was the maid, I'd let them live in that delusion, until the day they showed up and realized I now own the keys to their paradise. If they thought the story ended with me owning the keys to their paradise, they clearly didn't understand how revenge works when it's sharpened by years of being discarded. I didn't just want to own the resort. I wanted to become the silent architect of their unraveling, brick by invisible brick, while they clinked their champagne glasses under skies they thought were still theirs. While they lounged under palm trees and rubbed sunscreen on entitled shoulders, I was bleeding my 20s into every second of survival. I hustled through sunrises and staggered through midnights, fueled by burnt coffee and the echo of every insult they ever served me cold. I worked 3 jobs in college, not glamorous, not inspirational, just raw, ugly survival that stained my hands and underlined my silence. I took the 4 a.m. barista shifts, the late-night janitor gigs at upscale gyms, where girls like Lexi came to run on treadmills, while I scrubbed their discarded protein shake cups from the locker room trash. My third hustle was freelance digital marketing, cold emailing travel blogs, designing Pinterest-worthy infographics in borrowed computer labs, and pushing a shaky startup website between classes where I could barely keep my eyes open, while they posted selfies on swan floats with captions like, "My family over everything." I was crying into cracked phone screens in a shared dorm closet, trying to stretch Wi-Fi signal from the hallway just to submit a branding pitch to a boutique hotel in Vermont. I didn't post filtered brunches or sunrise yoga. I posted nothing at all, because every click I made had to be strategic. I wasn't hungry for followers. I was hungry for legacy. I earned my degree in hospitality in business, not with support or a safety net, but with hands blistered from scrubbing toilets in real resorts I couldn't afford to stay in. My textbooks were secondhand, my winter coat from a donation bin, and my dreams stitched together with nothing but grit and fury. They never asked if I was okay. Not once. Not when I missed meals. Not when I had to pawn my laptop to afford tuition. Not when I collapsed from exhaustion outside a lecture hall, and the nurse said I was severely dehydrated. But that silence, that absence of care, it wasn't weakness. It became jet fuel. After graduation, while they celebrated Weston's new promotion with lobster and Moet, I quietly launched my own booking agency out of a shared apartment with peeling wallpaper and a roommate who snored through job interviews. It was just me and my scraped-together website. Eco-luxury packages for high-end travelers who wanted beauty without guilt. I found remote locations no one was talking about, secluded treehouse villages in Costa Rica, underwater villas in the Maldives, cliffside solar suites in New Zealand, and I pitched them with a storyteller's tongue and a marketer's obsession. Slowly, one wealthy client turned into 3, then 10, then a portfolio of CEOs, artists, and Hollywood influencers who whispered my name at yacht parties and corporate retreats. I offered what the big travel sites didn't: intimacy, curation, secrecy. These clients wanted escapes no algorithm could find, and I became their gatekeeper. I didn't splurge on heels or handbags. I reinvested every cent into branding, into a team of freelancers I treated like gold, into relationships I nurtured, not with flattery, but with dependability. I kept my name off the masthead. Let the logo shine. Let the results speak. I didn't need to shout. I needed leverage. While my family flexed their wealth with weekly wine tastings and interior designers for their already perfect homes, I poured mine into quiet power. I stayed off Instagram. I didn't want them to see me rising until I was above their clouds. And then, on a sleepless night while scouting new partnerships for a Maldives resort chain, I stumbled on a tiny, unassuming headline at the bottom of a travel blog. Cedar Blue, resort facing bankruptcy amid ownership disputes. My heart didn't just skip, it slammed. The words flickered like fireworks in my mind, like a prophecy written just for me. I stayed up all night, digging into public records, tracing business registrations, watching local interviews of the owners, an elderly couple, Harold and Maureen Delancey, who spoke with that weary tone only heard from people trying to preserve something sacred while time chipped away at it. Their legacy, the very one my family worshipped, was crumbling under legal pressure, aging infrastructure, and ungrateful investors. I was on the first flight to Florida by morning. No entourage, no announcement, just me, in a rental car that smelled like sunblock and regret, pulling up to a resort I'd only ever seen in photos and resentment. It wasn't as glossy in person. The tennis courts were cracked, the paint faded in spots, the gardens still beautiful, but no longer immaculate. But there was soul. There was history. There was something here worth saving. I sat with Harold and Maureen on their patio, overlooking the water, where I'd once imagined my father sipping drinks without me. And I listened, not as a buyer, as a daughter, as a ghost come home with a checkbook and a mission. They weren't greedy. They just wanted to rest, to know their land wouldn't be stripped by developers who'd flatten it into a bland luxury chain. I showed them my portfolio. I promised preservation, respect, legacy, and most of all, protection. We talked for hours, and then, with the kind of handshake that echoes through lifetimes, I signed the papers. The price? Less than my father spent on Lexi's wedding photographer. Less than the cost of that designer veil Janet made her wear. Less than the wine tab from Weston's engagement dinner. And just like that, the sanctuary they flaunted every summer, the one I was never invited to, belonged to the girl they called Invisible, to the Maid. But I didn't tell them. No, I changed the name, rebranded the listing, kept everything intact, the same villas, the same photos, the same dates open on the calendar. And when Janet began planning the annual Cedar Blue trip, she booked through my company without even realizing she was typing her demands into a form I designed. Lexi requested extra champagne. Cam wanted an upgraded suite. Weston asked if a boat rental could be comped, because we've been loyal guests for years. I approved every request. With a smile, I let them come. I didn't deny them their trip. I wanted them to arrive, to step onto the soil they claimed as theirs, and not notice a thing, until it was too late, until every glass of wine they sipped had my fingerprints on it, until every pillow they laid on had been fluffed by my employees, until the welcome packet had my company's logo embossed in gold foil. They were walking into my world, and they had no idea. They had no idea, not even the faintest clue, that every step they took onto the pristine white stone entrance of the newly rebranded Haven Blue Resort was a step into the world I built from the ashes of their disdain. And as they breezed in, laughing, glowing, heads held high with their habitual arrogance, I watched them from the live feed monitors in my private suite, a silent conductor behind the curtain, heart hammering not from fear, but anticipation, like a puppeteer who knew exactly when to tug the strings. Janet led the procession, of course, swaying her hips in that ridiculous silk beach dress, her oversized designer sunglasses perched like armor on her face, her hair freshly blown out, her lips pursed in practiced elegance as she air-kissed the concierge like she was bestowing blessings, while Lexi trailed behind, dragging a neon pink suitcase that probably cost more than my first semester of college, tapping her phone with perfectly manicured claws, barking something about the temperature of the rosé not being acceptable if it wasn't already chilled to exactly 45 degrees. Cam was behind her, muttering about the lack of fragrance in the lobby, sniffing the air like he was judging it for impurities, while Weston tossed his sunglasses onto his head and tried tipping the valet with a $20 bill, and that smug little nod he used whenever he wanted to pretend he was a generous soul. And I sat there, watching, remembering, unblinking, as they paraded in like gods, returning to Olympus, completely oblivious that the realm they were stepping into no longer belonged to them. Every laugh, every dramatic sigh, every offhanded insult to the bellhop or front desk staff echoed in my ears like a twisted symphony. One I'd heard all my life, from the cold corners of basements and the shadows of forgotten doorways. I gave strict orders to the staff. Treat them kindly. Don't give them a single reason to suspect anything. Serve them with that honey-slicked customer service they always expected. But do not indulge them. Not until I said so. They checked in under the new resort name, not knowing I'd changed everything from the signage to the shell company ownership, not even realizing the woman who processed their credit card was my assistant, fully briefed and ready to record every interaction. When Lexi complained about the thread count in her suite's towels, I made sure the staff responded with empathy, but did nothing. When Cam huffed about his shower pressure being unworthy of a gold status guest, I had the engineering team nod sympathetically and walk away slowly. When Janet insisted she had previously reserved the presidential oceanfront villa, I had the desk clerk calmly inform her that the room was unavailable and that she'd been placed in the Grand View suite, still luxurious, but lacking the heated marble floors she so loved. And when Weston called from his room because the television didn't have sports premium, I smiled and declined his silent request for priority support. I waited until I knew they were all up at the rooftop infinity pool, drinks in hand, egos comfortably inflated by sun and shallow luxury. And then I sent up the appetizer, My version of a calling card, an elaborate custom charcuterie board sourced from 5 continents, topped with gold-dusted truffle brie, imported Italian figs, and a carefully placed note in shimmering foil that simply read, "With love, from the housemaid you raised." And I could almost feel the way Lexi's expression cracked from her smug grin to open-mouthed horror, the way Cam's fingers froze mid-swipe as he reread the note, the way Janet's sunglasses slid slowly down her nose like her soul was draining. And Weston, sweet, arrogant Weston, probably let out that confused laugh he did when something didn't compute in his tiny emotional vocabulary. My phone buzzed instantly, vibrating so violently on the desk it nearly slid off. One call, then another, then 5, then 15. Their names lighting up my screen like a storm of desperation and disbelief. Lexi texting in all caps, "What is this? Who did this?" Cam calling and hanging up 3 times in a row. Janet leaving voicemails so shrill I had to turn the volume down. And Weston, of course, with his predictable, "Hey, we need to talk." Like his entitlement alone could summon me, like a genie. I didn't respond, not even a tap back. I just let the silence thicken until their panic fermented into paranoia. And then, dressed in a crisp, white-tailored pantsuit with gold accents and subtle diamond studs that sparkled like quiet rage, I walked into the main lobby through the private owner's elevator, flanked by 2 of my top managers, both women who once cleaned rooms like I did and now ran entire departments under my leadership. The moment I stepped into the sunlight, heels echoing across the polished marble, the heads turned. First, the front desk staff, who nodded in silent pride, then the security team, who straightened their backs like soldiers, and then, finally, my family, who stood frozen by the concierge desk. Lexi's face ghostly pale, Weston's mouth twitching like he'd seen something supernatural, Cam blinking furiously like he'd entered an alternate reality, and Janet just stared, mouth slightly open, as if her Botox-laced muscles forgot how to react. Weston was the first to speak, voice thin and cracking. "Ember, you work here?" Like he was still clinging to the idea that I was just another employee, and I smiled, calm, cool, deadly, and said, "No, Weston, I own here." And the silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was seismic, as if the ground had shifted under their Louboutin heels and Ferragamo loafers and swallowed everything they ever believed about their place in the world. I turned to my staff and, with a nod, said, "Give them the basic package. No upgrades, no complimentary anything. And please remind them that verbal abuse of our staff is grounds for removal, especially when it includes the word Maid." And I didn't even need to look to know Janet's jaw clenched so hard it could have cracked her veneers. Lexi tried to laugh, this weak, strangled thing that sounded more like a dying bird than confidence, and said, "Okay, Ember, this is funny, but we're guests. You can't treat us like this." And I turned slowly, meeting her panicked eyes, and said, "Funny, I remember cleaning your puke off a yacht deck once while you laughed about how some people are just born to serve. Does this feel familiar?" And she blinked, her words shriveling in her throat like she'd swallowed fire. Cam took a step forward, his voice rising. "This is some kind of stunt. We'll have you fired." And I smiled, wider this time, and replied, "You can't fire the owner, Cam, but you can check out. There are plenty of 3-star resorts on the mainland." Janet finally found her voice, sharp and shrill, and said, "This is harassment. We are family." And I turned my full attention to her, every ounce of restrained rage blooming behind my ribs, and said, Family. You didn't even put my name on Christmas cards. You made me clean your guest rooms while you toasted to those who matter. You forgot my birthdays, ignored my scholarships, and told people I was your husband's early mistake. You don't get to play family now because I own the keys to your playground." And she opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again, but no words came. Just that same blinking, stunned silence that had always comforted her, now replaced by fear. I turned and walked away slowly, each step deliberate, each breath like a fire I'd held in for years, while my staff executed the order with elegance, removing their spa credits, cutting off their beachside privileges, moving them into less glamorous suites, and politely explaining that premium perks were reserved for platinum tier members, a category they would no longer reach. And that night, from the cameras in my suite, I watched them crumble, not all at once, but piece by piece. Lexi calling friends and being ignored, Cam pacing the hallway in a rage spiral, Weston making useless calls to non-existent contacts, and Janet sitting on a lounger alone, looking out at the sea she used to call her sanctuary, finally realizing that her kingdom had fallen, and the girl she once called invisible now reigned over every square inch of it. By the second morning, after they'd had a full night to marinate in the bitter realization that they were no longer untouchable gods walking marble floors, their composure began to splinter like cheap glass under a steel heel, and I watched from my suite's terrace, coffee in hand, as Lexi stormed up to the concierge desk with sunglasses perched on her forehead like a crown and entitlement dripping from every syllable of her voice, shrieking about writing the most scathing Yelp review in history, as if that threat could unravel an empire that was already being praised in travel magazines and business journals alike. And when the concierge politely smiled and said, "We understand. Here's a direct link to our recent Forbes feature, if you'd like more context about the ownership," Lexi's face twisted into something almost monstrous, her mouth opening but no clever words coming out, just a choked sort of gasp, like she'd tried to swallow her own pride and found it poisonous. Meanwhile, Weston, clearly the weakest link now that charm no longer had currency here, tried to corner me near the outdoor bar as if he could play the family card, like an ace pulled from a broken deck, and he gave me that same crooked grin he used in high school when he wanted to cheat off my homework, saying, "Come on, Ember. We were always kinda close, right?" But I didn't blink, didn't even flinch. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "You once made me eat lunch in the garage because your girlfriend said I looked too janitor for the dining room. Remember that?" And he opened his mouth to deny it, but the memory hit him before I even finished, and he stood there, hollow and defeated, swallowing his defense like sandpaper. Cam was next, trying to play the empathy card, saying he never knew I felt left out and would have tried harder if he'd understood. And I tilted my head like I was considering the possibility before answering, "Yeah, that's how exclusion works, Cam. You don't notice it because you're not the one who gets forgotten in every family photo, left out of vacation invites, or handed a broom while everyone else gets birthday cakes." And he stood there, stunned, blinking too fast, like maybe the truth had finally ruptured his protective bubble of ignorance. But I didn't care anymore about their realizations or regrets. They had built a life on my silence, and now I was building mine on their discomfort. By the third day, they'd begun to crumble in earnest, the heat and the stripped-back amenities wearing down their confidence until they looked more like exhausted tourists than luxury guests. And when Lexi came to the front desk with a voice dripping faux sweetness, begging, literally begging, for a single appointment at the spa because her skin was suffering from trauma, my staff looked to me, and I simply said, "No, not cruelly, not loudly, just clearly." And the way her face collapsed at that single syllable gave me a rush I didn't expect. Like every ignored birthday in scrubbed bathroom was finally gaining weight and worth. By the fourth day, I knew it was time, because power isn't just gained, it's executed, and they had been given more mercy than they ever showed me growing up. I put on my sharpest linen blazer, black with gold cuffs, hair pulled back like a blade, and walked with precise steps toward their cabana near the private beach, flanked by two of my highest-level security staff. Not because I needed protection, but because I wanted a witness to what retribution looked like when served with elegance. They saw me coming, all four of them lounging with forced relaxation, sunglasses up, fake smiles half lit, like they were still trying to act as if they had some upper hand. But as I stepped under the shade of their cabana, the temperature shifted, not because of the sun, but because I brought a storm with me. I didn't yell, didn't need to. I simply looked at each of them. Janet first, then Lexi, then Weston, then Cam, and said, "This resort upholds dignity and respect, something I never got in my own home. And after observing your repeated mistreatment of our staff and general disregard for our policies, I regret to inform you that your stay has come to an end. You've disrespected this staff, this space, and this legacy, and you're no longer welcome." And I let the words settle, like fog choking a room, and I saw Janet's nostrils flare before her voice cracked through the air like a whip. "You're embarrassing us," she hissed, venom coiling behind every syllable, her face blotchy from sun and fury. But I leaned in close enough that only she could hear, and whispered, "You embarrassed me my whole life. This is just me returning the favor." And then I straightened, nodded at security, and the moment unfolded like a live theater drama, written by karma itself. The guards began gathering their bags. No violence, no harshness, just precision. And Lexi tried to stand, but tripped over her wedges, crashing into a deck chair, while her expensive tote spilled across the sand. Weston cursed loudly, fists clenched at his sides, looking around for someone to blame. But no one cared. Janet cried, real tears now, streaking down her cheeks as her voice trembled, begging for some decency. But I only tilted my head and said, "You taught me that decency was optional. I'm just following the rules you lived by." Cam was the last to speak, holding his suitcase like a peace offering. Voice soft as he said, "I'm sorry, Ember. I really am." And I paused, staring at him long enough for the silence to tighten, before replying, "Apology doesn't pay for lost childhoods." And I turned away as they were escorted, past other guests who had begun filming the spectacle from their pool chairs and balconies, curious tourists whispering and pointing, their phones up, recording the once untouchable family, getting publicly removed from paradise, like misbehaving guests on a cruise ship. Lexi tried to swat a camera away and nearly fell again. Weston gave someone the middle finger. Janet sobbed into a silk scarf, and Cam looked straight ahead, like if he blinked, the shame would break him in half. And I stood there, at the top of the steps overlooking the valet loop, watching as the town car doors slammed shut and the engine pulled away from the white gravel, carrying with it the remains of the people who once told me I wasn't good enough to sit at the same dinner table, who used my labor, dismissed my value, erased my presence, and made me feel like less than dirt in a house I technically shared. And for the first time in my entire life, I stood on the high ground, literally and figuratively, inhaling the salt air that tasted like freedom and vengeance and clarity all at once. And I didn't wave, didn't speak, didn't smile. I just stood there, alone, powerful, whole, and let the wind whip my blazer like a victory flag. Because in the same space where they once denied me, dismissed me, and defined me as less, I had risen without rage, without cruelty, with only the kind of power they never understood. Earned, grounded, unshakable, and the cameras might have caught their collapse. But I was the one who captured something deeper, the ending of their illusion and the beginning of my legacy. The wind curled around my shoulders like applause from the universe itself as I stood there at the top of the marble steps, the same ones I used to scrub while dreaming of being seen. And now, here I was, dressed in tailored power, surrounded by a staff who respected me, watching the luxury SUV carrying my step-family shrink into the horizon. And yet it wasn't gloating or arrogance that filled me. It was something quieter, heavier, more sacred, justice that had finally caught up after years of silence. And as the sun lowered itself gently into the ocean, I exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been holding since childhood. A breath soaked in all the birthdays missed, report cards ignored, and smiles I faked while scrubbing their messes. Because now the roles had reversed, not through rage, but through resolve. And the earth somehow felt a little more level beneath my feet. That night, the sky above Cedar Blue bloomed with 1,000 stars. But I didn't need to wish on any of them. I had already made every one of mine come true, through grit, pain, and vision no one bothered to ask about. And while sipping a quiet glass of wine on the rooftop I'd once been banned from entering, I got a message from one of my assistant managers. "Hey, Ember, this TikTok is blowing up." And attached was a video clip of the family being escorted out earlier, filmed by a guest with nearly 1 million followers. And it had already hit 300K likes in an hour. Captioned, "She used to be their maid. Now she owns the whole place." And kicked them out. Icon. And I stared at it for a full minute before bursting out laughing. Real, breathless, joy-punched laughter, because the internet had finally seen me. Not as the forgotten daughter or the shadow at the dinner table, but as a woman who rewrote her story from the margins to the marquee. And within hours, my name began circling the platforms I once avoided. My face featured in slideshows about powerful female entrepreneurs. My email exploding with subject lines like, "Podcast guest request," "Interested in a feature," "Forbes Women," "Would you speak at our next retreat?" And through it all, I kept thinking back to that first moment I saw the Cedar Blue bankruptcy listing, how my heart had nearly broken out of my chest, and how I'd flown to Florida with nothing but a gut feeling and a file of numbers. And now, all these months later, I wasn't just the owner. I was the storm they never saw coming. But more than the investors and journalists, what stopped me in my tracks were the personal messages from women across the country, some as young as 15, some in their 40s, saying, "You gave me hope. You reminded me that I'm not crazy. I thought I was the only one. You showed me that quiet girls don't have to stay quiet forever." And I read each one slowly, some twice, tears sliding down my cheeks in the privacy of my office, as I realized that what I had built out of pain was becoming a platform for others, that my transformation wasn't just personal, it was contagious. And I knew then that revenge had served its course. But it wasn't what fulfilled me anymore. I didn't want to just win. I wanted to uplift, to reach backward and pull others forward. So I started sketching out a new idea that same week, not out of ambition, but out of alignment. A vision that felt like coming home to myself. And within 2 months, we soft-launched a new branch of Cedar Blue. A fully funded, women-only leadership and healing retreat for first-generation college girls. Girls like me, who had been made to feel like afterthoughts in their own homes, who ate dinner in silence while their siblings got toasted in champagne, who were called dramatic for simply asking to be included. And at this retreat, they weren't maids or outsiders or burdens. They were honored guests with ocean view suites, mentor sessions with self-made women, and welcome notes signed, "You are not invisible here," and the applications rolled in like waves, stories of quiet suffering paired with bright-eyed ambition. And I personally read every one, not because I had to, but because I knew what it meant for someone to finally hear you and say, "You matter." And that first retreat weekend, when I stood before a circle of 40 girls holding mugs of peppermint tea and wiping away tears as they introduced themselves, I realized that my healing was healing others. And it was more powerful than anything my family could have given me because it came from within. And speaking of my family, they did reach out eventually. Emails cloaked in softened tones, apology-shaped paragraphs that said things like, "We didn't realize how much we hurt you. We're so proud of you now. And maybe we could reconnect someday." And I stared at them, not with hatred, not with fire, but with a gentle, unshakable silence, because by then I had nothing left to prove, and I wasn't interested in dragging the past into a future it didn't belong in. So I archived the messages, never replied, and moved on with peace stitched into my every breath, because that's the thing about true transformation. It doesn't ask for revenge anymore. It demands space, and I was finally standing in mine. And when Cedar Blue was featured in a national documentary about women changing the face of business, they asked me what I would say to the people who once made me feel like a servant in my own home. And I paused before answering. Thank you for underestimating me, for ignoring me, for teaching me exactly how not to treat others. And the interviewer blinked, stunned, but I smiled because I meant it, and because I knew my voice now carried further than any of their dismissals ever could. And as I walk the shores of my resort each evening, the salt in the breeze, like a baptism, I sometimes still hear their laughter echoing faintly, not from trauma, but like a ghost finally laid to rest. And I whisper back, not out of bitterness, but out of finality, "You don't live here anymore," because they don't. Not in my head, not in my heart, not in the legacy I'm building brick by brick with women who were told to stay small. And the truth is, the biggest revenge I ever got wasn't kicking them out. It was never needing them to come back. I became the queen, not by claiming their castle, but by building my own kingdom on the ruins of the roles they forced me into. And if you're reading this right now, sitting in a life that feels too quiet, too dismissed, too heavy with unspoken hurt, I want you to remember this. Don't beg for a seat at the table. They'll never make room for someone they pretend not to see. Build your own table, furnish it with your fight, invite women like you to feast, and then bolt the door behind you. I am Ember Callahan, the forgotten daughter, the housemaid, the one who was told, "Not now, not ever." And now I sign contracts with my name in gold foil. I speak to rooms full of dreamers who once folded towels in silence. And I don't just own Cedar Blue. I own every version of myself I had to lose to become this one. And when people ask me what changed everything, I say, I stopped waiting for them to remember me, and I started building something they could never forget.